Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio and welcome back to our enemy AI mini-series. So far we've managed to get our enemy patrolling, standing guard, chasing, and attacking our player. However, attacks just look a little wrong as there's no visual feedback. So in this video we are going to create a damaged state first for our enemy. We're going to make it so he can take damage, so we have an animation when he's damaged, and we're going to add a knockback effect as well. That's where we're heading in this video. Let's get started. Now, as with most of our states, we're going to start by creating an animation, and you may have noticed if you're working with the Cobalt sprites that there is no damaged animation. So what we're going to do for this one is actually just grab a single frame from his attack here, one where his arms are back and it looks like perhaps he's been knocked back. I'm just going to copy this, create a new animation. We'll call this one Cobalt Damaged. We'll just paste that in there, make it last for a few frames. And then what we're going to do to make this a little more interesting is add a color flash. I'm just going to go a couple of frames in here, head over to our sprite renderer, and make sure that our color flashes red at this point. We'll then copy this initial keyframe here where his color was normal and paste that at the end so that we get a quick red flash that then fades back to normal. Next, we're going to head to our animator and set this up just like we have for our other states. First of all, I'm going to give it a generic name like damaged. Then we'll create a parameter for this. This one is going to be a bool called isDamaged. I'm just going to move it up top for ease, and then we can right-click down here on entry and make a transition into damaged, and then make another transition back out again. We'll head in whenever isDamaged is true, and then we're going to exit when isDamaged is set to false. Though at this point we want to make sure to turn off our exit time and set our duration to 0 so that we can immediately get back to battle after the damage is done. With the animation complete, we're ready to actually get coding, so let's create a new monobehavior script and call this one damaged state. Now when we get in here, we're just going to start by taking our start and update out of here and making sure that this inherits from state instead of monobehavior. As with all of our states, we'll then create our constructor. This will be a public damage state, and it's going to take in a reference to our enemy, and then it's going to pass that reference along to the base state. Now the very first thing we want to do here is actually just set our override string for the anim bool, and remember we're using isDamaged as the string for this state. Now in addition to playing the animation, we want to make sure that our enemy is actually knocked back, so let's create our override enter method. And first of all, because we do want to cause that animation to change, we're going to call base enter so the base state will do that. But next we're ready to add some knockback. That said, before we can code it, we're going to need a couple of variables. So let's come up top here where we can create a private float. This is going to be our knockback velocity and also a private float for the knockback duration. Okay, so first thing when we enter, let's set our knockback duration. Now for this, we're going to actually just pull a variable of the same name from our config. We'll create that in a moment. Now next we want to actually start the knockback, but the problem is in order to do this, we're going to need to know what direction we are being attacked from. For this, we're going to add a little more to our constructor. In addition to taking in the enemy, we also want to take in an integer, which is going to be the direction we've been hit. So for this, we'll calculate our knockback velocity as soon as this state is created. And it's just going to take in our knockback direction, which will get passed in a moment, and then it's going to multiply that by a new value in our config called the knockback force. This will just give it some directionality as well as force. Now that we know what that velocity is, we can come into enter and take our rigid body's linear velocity and just apply this new vector. On the x value, we're going to use our knockback velocity, so he'll move to the left or right. And for the y, we want to maintain gravity, so we'll just use the rigid body's linear velocity on the y, allowing it to calculate its own rise or fall rate depending on what's happening in our level. Now this will send our enemy flying, however we don't have a way to stop or transition out of this state yet. For this, we're going to use our override fixed update. So first of all, let's count down our knockback duration. So we'll just constantly take away time.fixed delta time from it, and if it gets to 0 or lower, first thing we want to do is just halt our enemy in his tracks. This will give him a nice snappy stop effect. So we'll make his linear velocity equal to, and here our vector 2 is going to have a 0 on the x. Again though, we want to keep our rigid body in charge of its own velocity on the y. That way if we knock him over a cliff, he won't freeze in midair, but we'll still be able to fall. Finally, we're ready now to transition out of this state. So we'll tell our state machine that it should change state, and here we'll just go to idle as it is set up to transition us into whatever state we need to go from there. Now, if we were to go into Unity right now, our code base would be screaming at us because those config values don't exist. So let's head into our enemy config And down at the bottom, let's make a new header for damaged. We'll start by creating a public float for our knockback duration, and I'll just set this to about 0.2 to start, and then we'll have another public float, which is going to be our knockback force. Here we'll use 30 as our base value. All right, so now our state's all set up, but we need a way to actually let it know what direction we're being attacked from and also set up the transition into that state. For this, we're gonna head to our health script. Remember that we've already created an action here called onDamaged, and this will just allow any subscribing scripts to know when a damage event has happened. That said, we don't any longer just need to know that it's happened, we also need a direction. So here we're gonna go to our action and add a parameter to it, in this case a vector2. Now then, we're also gonna come down to change health and add to its signature a vector2 for the position of the source. And then whenever we invoke this event, we want to make sure that we pass that source position along. Now, whenever we take damage, we won't just deal that damage, we'll also send out an event notification that we've been hit and also where that hit came from. So now I just want to make a short note about architecture. Now, we could handle all of our damage and death stuff right inside of health. However, I like to separate out responsibilities, as putting all of that logic in one place kind of muddies the waters and makes this script difficult to read and maintain. And so we've already created an enemy damage script, which if you followed along in our player series, we set up to spew death parts when we destroy our target dummy. But you'll notice that this already subscribes to the damaged method. So let's come on down below here, where we've already got the handle death, which is what handles spewing out those death parts, but instead let's come into this handle damage. Now in the past, I set this up to just play a trigger for is damaged, and we're gonna get rid of that as we have a much more sophisticated damage state now. So first off, we need to update this to take in the new parameter for our event, which is a vector2 for our source position. Now the first thing we'll do here is calculate our knockback direction. We'll create an integer for that and just start it off at 0 so that it always resets. Then we'll do the calculation itself. So this is going to begin by taking in the transform.position.x of the enemy itself, and we're going to check to see if that position is greater than the source position's x. Now if that's true, that means the player's on the right. We'll put a question mark here. That's just asking, is it true? And so we'll put a 1 for right, and if it's not true, we'll put a -1 so that it returns a leftward value. Now with that calculated, this is where we want to actually send our enemy to his damaged state and pass along that direction we just figured out. So to do this, we're gonna need a reference to our enemy script as it holds our state machine. Then we can come back down here and just tell our enemy that its state machine should change state into our damaged state. We'll pass along that enemy reference, and also, because we added one more parameter, we're gonna pass along the knockback direction as well. Now just as a quick review, whenever we take damage, our health script will take in the position the damage came from, and then pass that along when it calls the event. Our damage script then, which is listening for that event, will calculate the direction that it came from and send us into our damage state, notifying that damage state where the attack came from. Now when we go into Unity, we're gonna actually just use our console to guide us. We're gonna have a bunch of errors because we changed the signature on our health event. It's telling us that there's no such thing as state machine in enemy. That's because I got my capitalization wrong. We'll just add a capital here in the damage call. The next error just tells us that our enemy combat doesn't know what to do with this new source position parameter. So let's hit in there, and when we call change health, we'll not just pass along the damage, but also the position of our enemy at the time that he inflicts the damage. All right, next error up. Now the next error is actually an identical problem, it's just that this one's in our player's combat. So we'll make sure that he passes along his position as well when he damages an enemy. Now the final two errors will only affect you if you've been following along with our magic spell series. The first one's in our heal here, and it just also needs to know the position that the source is. Here we need a player reference since the cast spell itself won't actually have any physicality, so it'll just be the player's transform position. We can then go into our spark spell and we'll just need to do the exact same thing. All right, that's a long time without a test and we want to make sure nothing's going wrong, so let's click on our kobold and make sure first of all to give him the damage script. You'll notice it needs a bunch of variables, but first let's just make sure that he also has a health script. We'll just set him up with some values here, and then we can drag his health script into the health box. Make sure we drag our enemy script down into enemy, and then actually this animator is just an artifact from the old way we were handling damage, so we can take that out of our damage script altogether. Finally, these death parts are something we're not going to use in this video, and we'll deal with those in our death state later on. Now let's just grab our config here, make sure that we've got our values set. We did do this in the script itself, but it's kind of nice to have those available while testing so we can tweak them if we like. Now when we get in the game, things should actually already be working pretty well. However, if you try to knock over the cliff, you'll notice we get a strange effect where he goes into his idle state and then tries to patrol, but he's in space and he just gets confused. This is a very easy fix. We can head into our damage state here, and just instead of automatically going to idle state once the timer runs out, we're gonna check to see if there's a cliff. Now, if there is no cliff, we can go ahead and transition to idle. If not, though, we just wanna remain in this state so that he'll just continue to be knocked back as he falls. Now before we test that one, I'm just gonna pop into my player for a moment as I've given him a rather small attack range, which is kind of annoying. So I'm just gonna increase that right now so we don't have to get so close to actually land a hit. I'm also gonna give him a shorter cooldown so he can attack a little more quickly. All right, when we get in there now, I can attack the enemy. He knocks back quite nicely. And even if I hit him over a cliff, he falls naturally, kind of more the way you would expect. We are getting a bit of a blinking on that attack animation, so if you like, you could go into your animator and we'll just find our animation through here by clicking on it, and we can turn off loop time. That way he'll just stay frozen on the final frame of the animation rather than going back and forth in that blinking sort of way. You can decide which you like better. All right, I hope you found this one helpful. I know we didn't get as much done this time around, but damage and knockback can be pretty complex actually. In the next video, we'll add damage to our player and then get into some death, and pretty soon we're gonna be ready to create a second enemy, which is going to be so much faster than the first one, thanks to this robust modular system we've created. Hope to see you in those videos. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.